December 7, 1941, 7:55 a.m. A young sailor named James Anderson was pouring his morning coffee on the USS Arizona when he saw something that made his blood run cold. Black dots filling the Hawaiian sky, hundreds of them, getting closer, louder, and then he saw it, the red circle painted on the wings. In exactly 8 minutes, his ship would become a tomb for 1,177 men. But what happened in those 8 minutes? What these sailors did? What choices they made between life and death? That's a story that will make you question everything you think you know about courage, sacrifice, and the thin line between heroes and ordinary people just trying to survive another day. The night before the attack, Pearl Harbor was alive with laughter and music. Sailors filled the streets of Honolulu, dancing with their sweethearts, drinking in bars, living like young men who believed they had forever. The USS Arizona's band had just won the Battle of Music competition. They celebrated until midnight. Nobody knew that in less than 8 hours, most of them would be dead. But let's rewind even further, because this story doesn't start on December 7th. It starts 6 months earlier, on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, in a secret meeting room in Tokyo. Admiral Yamamoto stood before Japan's military leaders with a plan so bold, so dangerous, that even he knew it was near suicide. He wanted to strike the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The problem was simple. Pearl Harbor was 4,000 miles away from Japan. Across the largest ocean on Earth, no one had ever attempted a naval attack on that scale. The logistics alone seemed impossible. Japan would need to move an entire carrier fleet across the Pacific without being detected, refuel at sea, and strike with perfect precision. One mistake, one American patrol spotting them early, and the entire Japanese fleet would be destroyed before they fired a single shot. Yamamoto told his commanders something that would echo through history. He said, "I can run wild for 6 months, maybe a year, but after that, I have no confidence." He knew this attack would wake a sleeping giant. He knew America's industrial might would eventually crush Japan. But Japan's military leaders didn't listen to the second part. They only heard 6 months of victory. The plan was approved. Now, what most people don't know is that Yamamoto had actually lived in America. He studied at Harvard. He traveled across the United States. He saw the factories, the oil fields, the endless resources. He knew America's true power, and that's what made him different from the other Japanese military leaders. He didn't want this war, but he was a loyal soldier, and when ordered to plan an attack, he planned the most devastating surprise attack in naval history. The Japanese practiced for months. They studied Pearl Harbor's layout using spies and old tourist photographs. They modified their torpedoes because Pearl Harbor's water was too shallow for conventional torpedoes to work. They trained their pilots until they could hit targets blindfolded. And then, on November 26, 1941, the Japanese strike force left Japan in complete radio silence. 6 aircraft carriers, over 400 planes, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, the largest naval attack force ever assembled. They sailed through the North Pacific, through storms and rough seas, avoiding all shipping lanes. For 11 days, they moved like ghosts across the ocean. American intelligence had no idea they were coming. But here's where the story gets interesting. America actually had warnings, multiple warnings, just not the right people paying attention to the right warnings at the right time. On December 6th, American cryptographers decoded a Japanese diplomatic message. It was clearly a declaration that negotiations were over. President Roosevelt read it and said, "This means war," but he thought the attack would come in the Philippines, or maybe Thailand, not Hawaii. Never Hawaii. Hawaii was too far, too difficult, too crazy. That same evening, a Japanese submarine was spotted near Pearl Harbor. It was sunk. American officers reported it, but it was Saturday night. People were tired. They'd investigate in the morning. And then, on the morning of December 7th, at 7:02 a.m., two Army privates manning a radar station on Oahu's north shore saw something impossible on their screen. A massive formation of aircraft, over 50 miles out and closing fast. They immediately called their superior officer. The officer, a lieutenant who had just woken up, told them not to worry about it. He said it was probably a group of American B-17 bombers that were expected to arrive that morning from California. Don't worry about it, he said, and hung up. Those dots on the radar were 183 Japanese aircraft in the first wave of the attack. At 7:55 a.m., the first bomb fell. Now, imagine you're a sailor on one of those ships. It's Sunday morning. Most of the crew is still asleep or having breakfast. The ships are lined up perfectly along Battleship Row, sitting ducks in the harbor. You hear a sound, a whistling sound getting louder. You look up and see a plane diving toward you. You see the red circle on the wings, and your brain can't process what's happening, because this shouldn't be possible. You're in Hawaii. America isn't at war. This has to be some kind of drill, some kind of mistake. And then the explosions start. The USS Oklahoma was hit by 3 torpedoes in the first minutes. The ship rolled over in 12 minutes, trapping over 400 men inside. In the darkness of the capsized hull, men banged on the metal walls, trying to signal rescuers above. Some of them would survive for days, slowly running out of air, waiting for rescue that came too late. But here's something incredible. A sailor named Stephen Young was trapped in a small air pocket inside the Oklahoma. He could hear the rescuers cutting through the hull, getting closer, but they were cutting too slowly. The air was running out. Young made a decision. He found a wrench in the darkness, and he started tapping on the hull in Morse code, giving the rescuers above the exact coordinates of where to cut. Because of his calm thinking and absolute terror, 32 men were rescued from the Oklahoma. Young himself was pulled out after 25 hours in darkness. On the USS Arizona, something even more catastrophic happened. A Japanese armor-piercing bomb, converted from a battleship shell, struck the forward ammunition magazine at 8:06 a.m. The explosion was so massive it lifted the entire front of the ship out of the water. The blast wave was felt across the entire harbor. The Arizona sank in 9 minutes. 1,177 men died. It was the greatest loss of life on any ship in American naval history. A sailor named Lauren Bruner was on the Arizona's anti-aircraft director when the magazine exploded. He was blown into the air, covered in burning oil. When he landed, the deck around him was on fire. Men were jumping into water that was itself on fire because of all the leaked fuel. Bruner and 5 other sailors were trapped on the stern of the sinking ship. The only way off was a rope line to the repair ship USS Vestal, which was moored next to the Arizona. But the rope was 70 feet away, across a deck engulfed in flames. One sailor, Joe George, ran across the burning deck and secured the rope. Then Bruner and the others crossed, hand over hand, while fire raged below them and bullets struck the water around them. Bruner's hands were so badly burned that decades later, he still had the scars, but he made it. He survived. The Arizona's band, the one that had won the competition the night before, was entirely wiped out. 21 musicians, all dead. But while ships were sinking and men were dying, something incredible was happening across the harbor. Americans were fighting back. On the USS Nevada, the only battleship to get underway during the attack, sailors managed to build up steam and started moving toward the harbor entrance. The Japanese saw this and realized that if the Nevada sank in the narrow harbor entrance, it would trap the entire Pacific Fleet inside for months. So they threw everything at the Nevada, wave after wave of dive bombers. The ship was hit repeatedly, fires raging on the decks, but the crew kept fighting. They shot down multiple Japanese planes. Finally, to avoid blocking the harbor, the Nevada deliberately ran aground. But even beached and burning, her guns never stopped firing. A mess attendant named Doris Miller became one of the heroes of Pearl Harbor that day. Miller was African American, and in 1941, black sailors in the Navy weren't allowed to do anything except serve food and clean. They certainly weren't trained on weapons. Miller was collecting laundry when the attack began. He ran to the deck of the USS West Virginia, helped move the mortally wounded captain to safety, and then, without any training, manned an anti-aircraft gun and started shooting at Japanese planes. He fired until he ran out of ammunition, then helped evacuate sailors from the sinking ship. Miller became the first African American to receive the Navy Cross. All across Pearl Harbor, stories like this unfolded. Sailors who had never fired a weapon in combat suddenly became anti-aircraft gunners. Engineers stayed below in flooded compartments to keep engines running, knowing they'd probably drown. Medics worked in burning ships, pulling men from wreckage. Ordinary people made extraordinary choices in moments of absolute chaos. The attack lasted less than 2 hours. When it was over, 2,403 Americans were dead, 4 battleships sunk, 4 more damaged, nearly 200 aircraft destroyed. The Japanese lost only 29 aircraft and 5 Mi-8 submarines. But here's what the Japanese didn't destroy. They didn't hit the American aircraft carriers, because the carriers happened to be out at sea that day. They didn't destroy Pearl Harbor's fuel storage tanks or the submarine base or the repair facilities. Those targets seemed unimportant compared to the battleships, but they would prove critical to America's ability to strike back. And perhaps most importantly, the attack created something the Japanese never anticipated: unity. Before Pearl Harbor, America was divided. Many Americans wanted nothing to do with another war in Europe or Asia. The country was tired from the Depression, isolationist, fractured. On December 6, 1941, America was a nation at peace, uncertain about its role in the world. On December 8th, America was a nation at war, absolutely certain about its purpose. President Roosevelt's speech the next day asked Congress to declare war. The vote was 470 to 1. The only dissenting vote was from Jeannette Rankin, a pacifist who had also voted against entering World War I. Now, remember Yamamoto's warning? I can run wild for 6 months. He was almost exactly right. For 6 months, Japan dominated the Pacific. They took the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, Burma. They built an empire that stretched across half the Pacific Ocean. But then came the Battle of Midway. Exactly 6 months after Pearl Harbor, American codebreakers deciphered Japanese plans. American carriers, the ones that weren't at Pearl Harbor, ambushed the Japanese fleet. In one day, America destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, the same carriers that had launched the Pearl Harbor attack. Japan never recovered. The tide of the war turned. Yamamoto was killed a year later when American fighters shot down his plane. Over the South Pacific, American intelligence had decoded his travel plans. It was, in a way, payback for Pearl Harbor. But the cost of the Pacific War was staggering. Over 100,000 Americans killed, millions of Japanese dead, including hundreds of thousands of civilians. In the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the war Yamamoto tried to avoid, but helped start consumed everything. Today, you can still visit Pearl Harbor. The USS Arizona remains exactly where it sank on December 7, 1941. It's now a memorial. Over 900 bodies are still entombed inside the ship. The hull still leaks oil, about a quart per day. They call it the tears of the Arizona. The ship has been crying for over 80 years. Survivors of the Arizona chose to have their ashes interred inside the ship when they died, to be with their shipmates forever. The last survivor, Lauren Bruner, the one who crossed the burning deck on that rope, died in 2019. His ashes were placed inside the Arizona. He went back to the ship one final time. Every year on December 7th, a ceremony is held at the memorial. Fewer and fewer Pearl Harbor survivors attend each year. Soon, there will be none left. Only the stories remain. But here's what those stories teach us. Pearl Harbor wasn't just about ships and bombs and military strategy. It was about ordinary people facing an extraordinary moment. It was about sailors who became heroes because they had to. About men who made split-second decisions that meant life or death for themselves and others. About a nation that transformed from peace to war in a single morning. The Japanese military believed they could cripple America's will to fight. Instead, they unified a divided nation and unleashed industrial and military power that would sweep Across the Pacific like a tsunami, one Japanese officer, looking at the destruction at Pearl Harbor, supposedly said, "I fear all we have done is awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Whether he actually said it or not, it was true. December 7th, 1941, was the day that changed everything. For the sailors who died, for the survivors who carried those memories forever, for America, for Japan, for the entire world. World War II's Pacific Theater began with that single morning of fire and fury in Hawaii. And every year, on December 7th, we remember not just the attack, but the people, the musicians who never played another song, the sailor who tapped Morse code in the darkness, the mess attendant who manned a gun he wasn't supposed to touch, the men still entombed in the Arizona, beneath the waters of Pearl Harbor, their final resting place marked by oil still seeping from the wreckage. President Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy. He was right, but it should also live in memory as a day when ordinary Americans proved what they were capable of when everything was on the line. The battleships sunk at Pearl Harbor, most of them were raised, repaired, and went on to fight in the Pacific War. The West Virginia, the Tennessee, the California, the Nevada, they came back. They returned to the fight. In a way, those ships symbolized America itself. Knocked down, but not knocked out. Damaged, but not defeated. Ready to fight back. That's the real story of Pearl Harbor. Not just a story of surprise and destruction, but a story of resilience, courage, and the day America decided who it was going to be. The silent warriors of Pearl Harbor never got to tell all their stories. Many died in those first minutes of the attack, but their actions spoke louder than words ever could. They fought back with everything they had. They saved each other. They refused to surrender even when their ships were sinking beneath them. That's who they were. That's what December 7th, 1941 revealed about the American spirit. And that's why, 83 years later, we still remember the day the world changed in Pearl Harbor. If this story moved you, if it made you think about courage and sacrifice and what it means to be tested in your worst moment, then do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to Silent Warriors for more untold stories of American heroes, and drop a comment below telling me which part of this story hit you the hardest. These stories need to be told, and you being here, listening, watching, remembering, that's how we keep these silent warriors alive in our memory. Thank you for watching, and never forget, December 7th, 1941.